The living room of the Henderson home in Portland smelled faintly of yesterday's coffee and lingering smoke. Morning sunlight filtered softly through cream-colored blinds, scattering dim golden streaks across the polished wooden floor. Mark Henderson sat slouched in his armchair, a cold mug of coffee in his hand. The spent cigarette on the floor glowed faintly before curling away into a thin stream of smoke that drifted toward the slightly open window. Across from him sat Ethan, his 18-year-old son, shoulders slumped, eyes cast down. The college entrance exam results had just arrived. Ethan didn't pass. The room felt heavy, as if the outside world, the faint rustle of leaves, the distant hum of traffic, the chirping birds had been muted. Only Mark's sighs and the subtle thump of his own heartbeat filled the space. "My son." "He failed again," Mark said, his voice low and tense, layered with frustration and shame. His gaze fell on the cold coffee cup in his hand, searching for a semblance of warmth or comfort. "What do we do now? Should I send him to trade school? That would be so humiliating. I've poured so much time, money, effort into him, and yet here we are." Ethan's hands were clenched into fists, his face tinged with embarrassment and sadness. He didn't dare look at his father, yet he could feel the disappointment, the unspoken anger, and the helplessness radiating from Mark. Each word, each sigh of frustration seemed to carve into Ethan's fragile self-esteem. Mark stood and began pacing. His eyes wandered to the backyard, where the maple trees swayed lightly in the morning breeze, raindrops from last night clinging to the leaves, sparkling like tiny gems. But Mark saw none of the beauty. All he felt was weighted, oppressive, suffocating weight of failure, and then, creeping beneath the disappointment, came a tinge of envy. His old friend David Harper had a son, Lucas, who seemed to succeed effortlessly: scholarships, acceptance letters, accolades without the endless pressure Mark had placed on Ethan. Why did David's son excel while his own child struggled? Was it natural talent, luck, or some unseen advantage that Mark didn't have? Sitting down again, Mark's mind raced with conflicting emotions: frustration, worry, and even guilt. He looked around at the familiar objects of their home, the family portraits, the old piano Ethan used to tinker on shelves lined with books and trophies. Each item reminded him of the passage of time, of opportunities slipping away. The weight of responsibility pressed on him. Ethan finally lifted his head slightly. His eyes read and met his father's gaze for a fleeting moment. He could see the disappointment, the shame, and even the tiny spark of envy that Mark felt. The boy felt the crushing weight of expectation, the invisible comparison to Lucas Harper, and the nagging pressure to fix things he didn't yet understand. He wanted to escape, to vanish from this room, this house, this world of unmet expectations. Mark returned to the window, staring down at the street where the maple leaves glistened with leftover morning dew. He imagined a future where Ethan would succeed, go to college, thrive, make him proud. But now, all he saw was the current failure, the weight of unfulfilled dreams, and the gnawing worry that he might be failing his son by pushing too hard. The emotions tangled within him: disappointment, shame, anxiety, jealousy, and confusion pounded like a drum. Each heartbeat underscored the gravity of his role as a father, of the expectations he placed upon his child. As the morning sunlight cut through the smoke curling from the spent cigarette, Mark realized something crucial. Both he and Ethan were trapped in a cycle of pressure, disappointment, and unspoken frustration. He began to wonder, if things continued like this, would he only end up hurting his son further? Was there still a chance to guide him back? Outside, the world continued as usual. The leaves rustled, a car passed by slowly, and birds chirped faintly. But inside, the weight of parental expectation and adolescent fear coexisted in tense silence. A small, tentative spark of hope flickered in Mark's chest. Maybe, just maybe, there was a way to help his son. To rebuild trust, confidence, and motivation. The question lingered in the air like smoke from a dying cigarette. Could Ethan really change? And that question, heavy and unresolved, marked the beginning of a journey that would challenge both father and son, testing patience, understanding, and the deep bonds of family. Mark sighed again, his eyes following the faint sunlight reflecting on the floor. The cigarette smoke dissipated, the morning light growing warmer, and a quiet realization settled within him. He had to find a path forward, not through pressure or comparison, but through understanding, guidance, and perhaps a new way of connecting with Ethan. The next morning, Mark Henderson decided to visit his longtime friend, David Harper. Portland was still shrouded in a light morning mist, the pale sunlight filtering through the trees along the quiet street. Birds chirped intermittently, cars rolled slowly on the nearly empty roads, creating a soft rhythm that contrasted sharply with the knot of anxiety in Mark's chest. He kept asking himself, can David really show me how his son, Lucas, is so successful? David's house sat in a peaceful neighborhood, its white walls freshly painted and large glass windows opening onto a small front garden, where roses bloomed with vibrant colors. Mark knocked on the door, and David appeared, wearing a light blue shirt, his calm smile immediately putting him at ease. He shook Mark's hand warmly. "Mark, long time no see." "Come in, have some tea," David said, inviting him into the sunlit living room. Sunlight poured through the windows, reflecting off the polished wooden floors, highlighting small potted plants along the window sills. The room felt warm and welcoming, a safe space for honest conversation. Mark felt a mixture of curiosity and skepticism. The weight of Ethan's failure still pressed heavily on him. But he needed to understand, how could Lucas be so successful when David wasn't a particularly strict or genius-level parent? After exchanging a few pleasantries, Mark could no longer contain himself. He leaned forward, a mixture of frustration and hope in his eyes. "David, I have to ask. Lucas, he's extraordinary. I've invested so much in Ethan, but he still failed. I just don't understand. How does your son succeed without all the pressure or money I've poured into him?" David smiled, calm and confident, and sat down across from Mark. He set his teacup on the table and replied softly, "Mark, my family isn't wealthy, but I've invested plenty, just in a different way. I've invested in teaching my son to respect his teachers. That's the most important thing." Mark furrowed his brow, slightly confused. Respect teachers, but isn't grades, scholarships, or tutoring more important? David chuckled softly, eyes warm but resolute. "You might find it unusual, but there's a Vietnamese saying, Muon sang thơ, btcsu ki. Muon, con, hey, cha phai, you lie thigh. Loosely, it means, if you want your child to excel, you must first foster respect and love for their teachers. Success doesn't come from pressure or money, it comes from a child valuing and listening to their teachers." Mark sat in silence, astonished and skeptical. He had always believed in monitoring, controlling, sometimes even micromanaging. Ethan's every study move to prevent mistakes. And here David was, saying that all it took was teaching respect for teachers. David continued, his voice patient and steady. When Lucas was younger, whenever he made a mistake or was disciplined, I didn't overprotect him. I asked what happened and explained why the teacher was right. Then I would guide him to apologize and promise not to repeat the mistake. That respect became the foundation for him to study diligently and self-motivate. Mark couldn't help but feel impressed. David's calm, confident demeanor contrasted sharply with the chaotic mix of frustration and disappointment he had felt the day before. Still, doubt lingered. Can Ethan respond to this approach? David met Mark's eyes, reassuringly. Mark, it won't always be easy, but it works. If you adjust your attitude, start respecting teachers yourself, and guide Ethan to do the same, he will follow. Once a child truly respects their teacher, results follow naturally. Mark inhaled deeply, noticing small details around David's living room, the soft rug underfoot, sunlight flickering across the floor, the gentle trickle from a small water filter on the counter. Slowly, he began to visualize. If he also modeled respect for Ethan's teachers, Ethan would imitate him. This could be the first step in rescuing his son from failure. David shared concrete examples. Lucas had been disciplined once for forgetting to submit homework. Instead of arguing, David guided him to approach the teacher, apologize, and promise to improve. The effect was immediate. Lucas not only became more diligent, but earned the teacher's respect, and his self-confidence blossomed over time. Mark realized the clear difference. He had overprotected Ethan, even arguing with teachers in his defense, which eroded his son's trust and motivation. In contrast, David patiently guided Lucas, teaching respect, self-discipline, and accountability. A wave of mixed emotions washed over Mark, shame or curiosity. Can I really do this? He wondered silently. David smiled again. Of course, all it takes is consistency and patience. Don't push grades or achievements. Focus on building respect and responsibility first. That's the foundation for genuine success. Mark breathed deeply, glancing out the window at the swaying maple leaves. A subtle hope began to blossom. He realized that this would be challenging, but for the first time, he saw a clear path forward, not through pressure or comparison, but through changing himself. The conversation stretched on, filled with examples, anecdotes, and small gestures of encouragement. Mark saw a pattern. Lucas thrived not because of pressure, wealth, or genius parenting, but because he was guided to respect authority, take responsibility, and grow autonomously. As the morning sunlight grew warmer, Mark stood, shook David's hand firmly, and said, "Thank you. David, I'll try this with Ethan. I hope he can change." David nodded. Just be patient and consistent. You're not forcing your child to succeed. You're creating the environment where he can. Respect leads to growth, and growth leads to achievement. On the drive home, Mark thought about Ethan, sitting alone at home, disappointed, anxious, and perhaps a little lost. But now he had a clear strategy, patiently modeling respect for teachers, guiding Ethan to make amends, and fostering self-motivation. He imagined Ethan approaching a teacher, apologizing for mistakes, studying with purpose, and slowly regaining confidence. The mix of nervousness and excitement in Mark's chest grew as Ethan embraced this method. Back home, Mark paused at the doorway. Everything felt different. the morning sunlight spilling through the curtains, the room cleaned of yesterday's cigarette ashes, the soft glow signaling a fresh start. He opened the door and looked at his son, sitting silently, and whispered to himself, "The journey has begun. This time I'll walk with him, not with pressure, but with guidance, respect, and trust." The next morning, Mark Henderson couldn't stop thinking about his conversation with David Harper. Sunlight filtered softly through the blinds of his living room, casting long streaks of gold on the wooden floor. Mark sat in his armchair, holding a steaming cup of coffee, staring at the maple trees in the front yard, their leaves swaying gently in the breeze. In his mind, he could still see Lucas Harper, David's son, the way he bowed to his teachers, the way he apologized when he made mistakes, and the quiet confidence in his eyes. Mark wondered, could Ethan ever be like that? Could I really teach him to respect his teachers the way David did with Lucas? The pressure was still there, but now it carried a glimmer of hope, not despair. He decided he would try to learn David's approach. A few days later, Mark arranged to meet David again, this time to learn in detail the method David called BTCSUQ. As Mark stepped into David's house, the morning sunlight filled the spacious living room. Small potted plants on the windowsill glimmered in the light, and the faint scent of blooming roses wafted in from the garden outside. David invited Mark to sit and poured him a cup of tea. "Mark," David began, his voice calm and confident, "today I'll show you exactly how I guided Lucas. It's not magic, but if you are patient and consistent, you'll see results." Mark leaned forward, fully attentive, picturing his own son, Ethan, sitting nervously across from him, waiting for guidance. David started by explaining the Vietnamese proverb, Muon Sang Thơ BTC SUKU. Muon Kan Hei Cha Phi U Lai Thai. It roughly means, if you want your child to excel, you must first cultivate respect for their teachers. Academic success doesn't come from money or pressure, comes from a child valuing and listening to their teachers. Mark raised his eyebrows in surprise. "You mean I just need to teach Ethan to respect his teachers?" David nodded. "Exactly. Only when children respect their teachers will they truly pay attention, truly learn. Let me give you some real-life examples from Lucas." David explained, when Lucas was in 7th grade, he forgot to turn in an important assignment. Instead of defending him, David calmly asked, "What happened, Lucas? Why did you forget?" Lucas's eyes, red from worry, mumbled an explanation. David didn't scold him. Instead, he said, "The teacher is right to be disappointed. Let's go apologize and promise not to repeat it. Do you understand?" Lucas nodded. The next day, David accompanied him to class. Lucas bowed his head, sincerely said, "I'm sorry, teacher." "I promise it won't happen again," David explained. This act builds a respectful connection between student and teacher. Lucas no longer feared or resisted authority. He understood that teachers deserved respect. When respect is established, children become self-motivated learners. Mark listened, eyes wide. He imagined Ethan, hesitant and disappointed, going through the same ritual. Could his son gather the courage to bow, apologize, and promise to improve? But he could see the power of the method. No force, no yelling, just guidance and parental modeling. David continued. There was a time Lucas had an argument with a teacher over a misunderstanding. Instead of defending Lucas in front of the teacher, David said, "Let's go talk to the teacher. Explain the misunderstanding, and apologize if needed. Lucas learned to remain calm and respectful, and classroom relationships improved. The result, he became more responsible and eventually earned scholarships and teacher praise. Mark realized the key difference. He had unintentionally hurt Ethan by overprotecting him and arguing with teachers, which eroded his son's trust and motivation. David, in contrast, patiently guided Lucas, teaching respect, responsibility, and self-discipline. David emphasized, "Mark, for this to work, you must lead by example. Even if a teacher is younger than you, less experienced, or imperfect, you must show respect so Ethan can imitate you. Parents are role models." Mark looked out the window at the swaying maple leaves. A spark of hope arose. If done right, Ethan could change. He imagined his son bowing to a teacher, acknowledging mistakes, studying diligently, and gradually gaining confidence. He began planning each step, visiting former teachers, guiding Ethan to apologize when necessary, and most importantly, modeling the behavior for him to follow. David smiled. The beginning will be tough. Ethan might be shy, hesitant, or even resist. But if you are patient and consistent, respect will take root and results will come. Mark nodded, a mix of nervousness and excitement filling him. "I understand. I'll try. I want my son to change, and I'll be with him every step of the way," David added. "You're not forcing him to succeed, you're creating an environment where he can. When respect is established, self-motivation and results will follow naturally." Mark stood, taking in the room's details. Sunlight on the floor, plants swaying slightly, birds singing outside. Everything felt like a symbol of a fresh start. He knew the journey would be long, but for the first time, he felt a method that could really help Ethan as he drove home. Mark thought of Ethan sitting alone, disappointed and anxious. Now he had a concrete strategy: patiently model respect for teachers, guide Ethan to make amends, and provide a consistent example. He imagined his son approaching a teacher, apologizing, and slowly regaining confidence. Nervousness and excitement mingled in Mark's chest. Would Ethan accept this approach? Back home, Mark paused at the doorway. Everything felt different. Morning sunlight streamed through the curtains, the room clean and bright, signaling a new beginning. He opened the door and looked at his son sitting silently. He whispered to himself, "The journey begins today. This time, I'll walk with him not with pressure, but with guidance, respect, and trust." That afternoon, Mark Henderson sat alone in his living room. The late afternoon sun streamed through the blinds, casting golden streaks across the polished wooden floor. He held a still warm cup of coffee, but didn't take a sip. Inside, his emotions churned like stormy waves, compressed, chaotic, and overwhelming. Ethan, his son, sat quietly in his room, head bowed over his schoolwork, staring at pages he hadn't touched yesterday. Mark watched him, a mixture of pain and frustration twisting in his chest. He realized that all the pressure, expectations, and constant pushing he had applied over the years had not brought results. Worse, it had eroded Ethan's confidence and motivation. Mark let out a soft sigh. I've been doing this all wrong. I've overprotected him. I've argued with his teachers." His mind replayed the incident when he stormed into school to defend Ethan from a punishment. At the time, he thought he was helping his son, but now he saw that he had planted doubt about authority in Ethan's mind, weakening the boy's trust and willingness to learn. The shame gnawed at him. He wondered, will Ethan ever forgive me? Do I have the courage to change? The questions swirled endlessly in his head, offering no easy answers. Mark sat quietly, staring at the empty chair beside him, imagining David Harper's calm, encouraging smile, his steady patience, a stark contrast to Mark's own turmoil. A part of him resisted the idea of change. Will this approach even work for Ethan? He's failed so many times. I've invested so much money, time, and effort. Can respect alone really help him succeed? Doubt pressed heavily on him, weighing down his chest. Yet another part of Mark was awakening. He recalled the bright, respectful gaze of Lucas Harper, David's son, the way Lucas listened attentively, responded respectfully, and carried himself with quiet confidence. Mark imagined Ethan showing even a fraction of that attitude. The thought ignited a spark of hope. If Ethan could learn to respect his teachers, everything might change. Mark rose and walked around the living room, observing details he had never noticed before. Sunlight catching the edge of a framed painting, the faint rustle of leaves outside, the steady tick of the wall clock. The calmness of the environment contrasted sharply with the storm inside him. Doubt versus hope, guilt versus determination. He silently told himself, I have to change. I cannot continue to protect him the way I did before. I must lead by example, teach him to respect his teachers, even if it's difficult or met with resistance. That internal resolve hit him like a jolt, partially lifting the heavy weight of self-reproach and making room for a new sense of possibility. Mark knew it wouldn't be easy. In the past, whenever Ethan made a mistake or was disciplined, his instinct was to defend him, sometimes even raising his voice at teachers. Now, he would need to exercise patience, control his emotions, and resist his protective impulses. He worried, would Ethan accept this new approach? Could he remain consistent long enough for Ethan to truly internalize these lessons? Sitting back down, Mark bowed his head, letting his mind settle. He revisited each past moment of overprotection, the scoldings, the arguments with teachers, the unintentional messages of fear and doubt he had sent to his son. Each memory felt like a sharp sting, but instead of collapsing under the weight, he resolved to turn that pain into motivation. Mark began to visualize concrete steps, taking Ethan to visit former teachers, guiding him to apologize when necessary, and most importantly, modeling the behavior himself. He vowed not to defend Ethan blindly, not to argue unnecessarily, but to remain patient, calm, and consistent, a living example of respect and responsibility. Finally, Mark stood, taking a deep breath. The sunlight now fully filled the room, dissolving the clouds of self-doubt and guilt. He felt a mix of relief and determination. This was the beginning of a long journey, but he understood that only by changing himself could he truly help his son. Mark glanced toward Ethan, sitting quietly, unaware of the transformation stirring in his father. A small, reassuring smile crept across his face as he walked over, placing a hand gently on his son's shoulder. He whispered, I'll be with you through all of this. This time, we'll do it differently. We'll respect your teachers, and you'll learn to stand on your own. In that moment, Mark felt a new connection with his son, a hopeful beginning. The road ahead would be challenging, but for the first time, he realized, when a parent changes, a child has the chance to change too. That Saturday morning, Mark Henderson stood outside the living room, watching Ethan sit on the chair, holding a book but staring blankly out the window. In that moment, Mark's thoughts drifted to Lucas Harper, David's son. He remembered clearly the days when Lucas was in 6th grade, bright round eyes, curious yet sometimes stubborn, occasionally forgetting assignments. But the biggest difference was how he viewed his teachers. David had shared that whenever Lucas made a mistake, instead of scolding him or defending him in front of the teacher, he would calmly guide Lucas to approach the teacher, explain what happened, apologize if necessary, and promise not to repeat it. At first, Lucas was shy, blushing, and bowing his head. But through his father's patient guidance, he gradually understood that teachers deserved respect, and that he needed to listen. Mark looked at Ethan, seeing the same bright, curious eyes as Lucas. But there was a stark contrast. Ethan did not trust his teachers. Whenever he was disciplined or corrected, he would look to Mark for defense or frown in defiance. Mark's past overprotectiveness, the times he had argued with teachers on Ethan's behalf, had unintentionally planted doubt in Ethan's mind about the fairness and authority of his educators, weakening his motivation to study. Mark sighed, recalling the specific moments, the day Ethan forgot to submit an important assignment. When Mark stormed into the school and argued with the teacher to defend his son, Ethan had stood there, flustered, looking at his father with a mixture of fear and disappointment. At the time, Mark thought he was helping, but now he realized his actions had hindered Ethan's growth. Meanwhile, Lucas Harper was completely different. Mark pictured Lucas bowing and apologizing to his teacher, then returning home with a bright face, proud and confident that he had done the right thing. Over time, Lucas became self-motivated, submitting assignments on time, paying attention in class, and never hesitating to ask questions when he struggled. Thanks to David's patience and modeling, Lucas earned scholarships, consistently ranked at the top of his class, and was adored by teachers. Mark felt the stark contrast. Ethan, shielded too much by his father, had lost trust in teachers and became disengaged. Lucas, guided to respect authority, became diligent, confident, and successful. This comparison left Mark feeling both ashamed and awakened. He realized that a child's success doesn't depend solely on intelligence or financial investment. It depends on parental approach, attitude, and fostering respect for teachers. Mark sat down beside Ethan, observing every gesture, fidgeting fingers, glances toward the window, occasional sighs. He gently said, "Ethan, I want to talk to you for a moment." Ethan looked up, a little surprised, curiosity flickering in his eyes. Mark continued, "I know I've overprotected you in the past. Every time you struggled, I defended you too much, and you lost trust in your teachers. I'm sorry for that. But from now on, we'll do things differently. I want to show you a way to succeed and be confident." Ethan looked at his father, silent for a long moment, then shrugged, a mix of embarrassment and intrigue. Mark sensed a small opening, like a door just beginning to crack. For a journey of change, a week later, Mark took Ethan to visit a former teacher from elementary school. As they entered the classroom, Ethan hesitated, holding his father's hand. Mark gently said, "Con, bow and apologize if necessary. I'll show you how it's done." Ethan lowered his head and whispered, "I'm sorry, ma'am. I promise to try harder." The teacher smiled, looking at Mark and then Ethan. "I know you can do it. Keep trying, okay?" Mark noticed a spark in Ethan's eyes, a small sense of pride. For the first time, Ethan truly understood the importance of teachers and respect. Meanwhile, Lucas Harper continued to excel, submitting work on time, joining clubs, earning scholarships. David's patience had cultivated not only academic success, but also character, confidence, politeness, respect for adults, and responsibility. Mark observed Ethan and recognized the difference. One path shaped by overprotection and doubt, the other by guidance, patience, and respect. He understood that success is not determined by money or intelligence, but by attitude, respect, and parental modeling. Mark smiled at Ethan one last time before leaving and thought to himself, "We'll take this one step at a time. You'll learn respect, self-discipline, and success. I'll be with you every day, patiently guiding you." In that moment, Mark realized the power of patience, respect, and parental example. The journey ahead would be long, but for the first time, he felt hope that Ethan could become confident, diligent, and respectful of his teachers. On Monday morning, the early sunlight streamed through the windows of the Henderson home in Portland, casting warm streaks across the polished wooden floor. Mark Henderson stood by the window, holding a still warm cup of coffee, but he barely noticed its bitter taste. Inside him, a mix of anxious anticipation and cautious hope swirled. He knew today would be the first real test of his new approach with Ethan. In the past, Mark had overprotected his son, defended him against teachers, and intervened in every minor detail of his studies. But after conversations with David Harper, he finally understood that the first step to changing Ethan's behavior was to change himself. Ethan walked out of his bedroom, hair messy and eyes half closed. He held his backpack, preparing for school, but looked at Mark with a cautious curiosity, as if silently asking what today would bring. Mark smiled gently, striving to appear calm and confident, even though his heart was racing. "Ethan, today I want us to try something new," Mark said softly but firmly. "We're going to visit your old teacher. Do you remember her?" Ethan shrugged but didn't object, his silence carrying a spark of curiosity. Mark knew the boy didn't yet understand the purpose, but he also knew that respect and gratitude toward teachers had to be taught step by step, starting with direct experience. On the drive to the elementary school, Mark explained further, "You see, in the past I defended you too much, right? I know that made you doubt your teachers. Today, we're going to do the opposite. Show respect and apologize if needed. I'll also set an example for you." Ethan stayed quiet, eyes on the street, where autumn leaves shimmered gold in the morning sun. Cars rushed by, horns honking in the distance, but Mark sensed Ethan was truly listening. He smiled inwardly, a small but significant sign that his son was opening up to the new approach. When they arrived in the classroom, sunlight streamed through the glass windows, creating a soft golden glow on the floor. Mrs. Linda, Ethan's former teacher, was arranging books when she saw the father and son. She smiled warmly. Mark bowed slightly in a respectful gesture, his demeanor calm and sincere. "Hello, Mrs. Linda," Mark said warmly. "It's been a while. I brought Ethan to visit you and to learn how to show respect properly." Ethan stood beside him, shy, clutching his backpack. Mark gave a subtle nod of encouragement. Ethan lowered his head and whispered, "Hello, ma'am. I'm sorry if I caused trouble before. I promise to try harder." Mrs. Linda smiled, looking at both of them. "You did very well. I know you can do it. Keep it up." Mark noticed a spark in Ethan's eyes, a tiny sense of pride and satisfaction. This was the first moment, but a crucial one, when Ethan truly felt the value of respect and personal responsibility. On the drive home, Mark talked with Ethan about how it felt to bow, apologize, and receive encouragement from his teacher. Ethan admitted he felt less worried and a little proud for doing the right thing. Mark remained quiet, a sense of relief and satisfaction washing over him. He knew that attitude change wouldn't happen overnight, but today marked the first meaningful step. Over the following days, Mark continued to apply the new approach. Whenever Ethan struggled academically or made a mistake, Mark no longer blindly defended him. Instead, he listened, asked questions, analyzed the situation, and guided him to respond appropriately. Sometimes they wrote apology notes to teachers together, or discussed how to correct mistakes, always emphasizing respect for the educators. Mark noticed Ethan became less resistant, gradually learning to take responsibility for his actions, and most importantly, beginning to trust his teachers. Ethan's gestures and expressions changed, bowing when necessary, sitting attentively, completing homework voluntarily. These small changes made Mark feel a subtle yet real sense of progress, reinforcing his belief that only by changing himself could he truly help his son change. One evening at dinner, Mark shared the story of Lucas Harper with Ethan, emphasizing how respect for teachers shaped Lucas's academic and personal growth. Ethan listened intently, eyes bright, asking questions about how Lucas handled mistakes and earned scholarships. Mark smiled, noticing that his son had begun to learn by observing and reflecting on others, a skill Ethan had rarely used before. Mark also committed to being a role model. Whenever he spoke with teachers, he remained calm, polite, and respectful. Ethan observed and gradually learned to mirror his father's demeanor. This modeling behavior helped Ethan internalize positive habits, reinforcing the lessons Mark wanted him to learn. A week later, Mark took Ethan to an academic award ceremony at his old school. Ethan hesitated at first, standing beside his father, but Mark held his hand gently and said, "Remember to show respect and pay attention to everyone." Ethan bowed, greeted the teachers, and even shook hands confidently with several staff members. For the first time, he experienced pride not from achievement, but from doing the right thing and showing respect. Mark felt a surge of happiness. The new approach was beginning to bear fruit. In the following days, Mark remained consistent, visiting old teachers, modeling respect, guiding apologies when necessary, and most importantly, maintaining patience and composure. Ethan's behavior changed noticeably, taking responsibility for assignments, focusing in class, and even reminding himself when he drifted off. Mark realized a fundamental truth. A child's academic success and character development depend less on intelligence or money, and more on respect for teachers and parental modeling. When a parent is calm, patient, and respectful, the child learns to mirror those behaviors, gaining confidence and self-discipline. As night fell, Mark sat by the window, watching Ethan study under the desk lamp. The warm light illuminated his son's focused face. Mark felt peaceful and fulfilled. Today marked the first step in a long journey, signaling a true shift in Ethan's attitude and behavior. He silently vowed, "We've taken the first step. You will learn respect, responsibility, and confidence. I will patiently guide you every day." In that quiet moment, Mark felt the power of patience, respect, and parental example, realizing for the first time that when a parent changes, a child gains the opportunity to change too, and results will gradually show through behavior and attitude. On Wednesday morning, soft sunlight filtered through Ethan's bedroom window, illuminating his messy hair and the mix of excitement and nervousness in his eyes. Today was a special day. For the first time, he would put into practice the new approach his father had been guiding him through. Facing teachers and the academic environment he had once avoided and resisted. Mark Henderson stood by the window, holding his still warm coffee, watching his son. His heart raced with a blend of anxious anticipation and hope. He knew that this first step was crucial. If Ethan succeeded today, it would lay the foundation for all the changes to come. Ethan, today I want you to try something new, Mark said gently but firmly. We're going to class to meet your teachers, and you will show respect and take responsibility on your own. I'll be here, but this is your action. Ethan lowered his gaze, clutching his backpack tightly. He was anxious, yet curious. At that moment, Mark recognized that his son's hesitation was natural, and this emotional tension was exactly where he would learn control and growth. On the drive to school, Mark spoke gently to ease Ethan's nerves. They drove past Portland streets, lined with golden autumn leaves, cars rushing by, city sounds mingling with rustling leaves. Mark told Ethan about Lucas Harper, David's son, describing how Lucas faced mistakes, apologized to teachers, and took responsibility. Ethan listened attentively, eyes brightening slightly, as if he had found a model to follow. When they arrived at the classroom, Ethan paused at the door, hand gripping his backpack strap, heart pounding. The classroom looked the same. Wooden desks, whiteboard, sunlight streaming through the windows, a few students chatting. Mark bowed slightly to show respect before opening the door. Hello, Mrs. Linda. We're here to visit and for Ethan to learn how to show respect properly. Ethan took a deep breath and stepped inside. His eyes quickly scanned the room, recognizing teachers and some familiar classmates. He lowered his head and whispered, "Hello, ma'am. I will try my best to do better and respect the teachers." Mrs. Linda smiled warmly. "You're doing very well. I know you can do it." Mark observed Ethan, noticing his eyes opening wider, posture straightening, steps more confident. He realized that direct practice, under the watchful eye of his father and teacher, had a profound impact. During class, Ethan actively participated, raising his hand to answer questions and listening carefully to instructions. When doing group work, he no longer slacked off or relied on others. He engaged fully, sharing ideas and even reminding himself to stay focused. Mark watched from the hallway, feeling small but significant progress in his son's attitude. After class, Mark took Ethan outside to the playground, where a few other students were playing basketball. He encouraged his son, "Say hello to your friends and thank your teachers before leaving." Ethan hesitated, then lowered his head and spoke politely. Some classmates looked surprised, but he did not falter. Mark smiled, seeing a tiny spark of confidence emerging. That afternoon, on the way home, Ethan began talking about his class experience. "I felt happy when she said I did well. And I think listening to teachers is easier when I respect them." Mark nodded, heart lightened. He knew that this first challenge had laid an important foundation. Ethan was beginning to understand that learning was not just about completing. A Simon Sit was about attitude and responsibility. The next day, Mark continued the challenge by taking Ethan to visit some of his former teachers. Each time, he reminded his son to bow, apologize if necessary, and express gratitude. Ethan was initially awkward, eyes darting around, but with each visit, he grew more confident. One evening, Mark sat by the study desk, watching Ethan do homework. He was no longer impatient or distracted. He focused carefully on each question, taking notes thoroughly. Mark felt a quiet sense of fulfillment for the first time. He saw his son taking initiative, accepting responsibility, and adapting to the new method during the week. Mark also observed Ethan interacting with peers. Previously, he had been quick to complain and sometimes stubborn, but now he listened, shared opinions respectfully, and even compromised when needed. Mark realized that respect for teachers had begun to influence how he treated others, gradually shaping a positive character by the weekend. Mark decided to set a bigger challenge, taking Ethan to the public library to join a reading group with other students. Ethan was anxious at first, his eyes wide with uncertainty. But Mark held his hand gently and said, "Show respect to the instructor, listen to others, and share your ideas." Ethan inhaled deeply and entered the room. The reading session was tense at first, as the other students already knew each other. But Ethan overcame his shyness, bowed to the teacher, listened carefully, and gradually spoke up, answering questions confidently. Mark stood outside, watching, sensing a clear step forward in his son's attitude and self-confidence. On the way home, Ethan shared his feelings. "I feel happy. Talking with everyone wasn't as hard as I thought. I think respecting and listening really helps me feel more confident." Mark smiled warmly, heart full of hope. He knew that the first real test had succeeded, and every next step would build on this foundation. Changing attitude, self-discipline, and respect for teachers was not just academic, it was shaping long-term character. That evening, as Mark sat by the window watching Ethan read under the desk lamp, he reflected, "We've passed the first test. You will continue to learn respect, responsibility, and confidence. I will patiently guide you, one step at a time." In that quiet moment, Mark understood the power of patience, respect, and parental modeling. He realized that when a parent changes and guides correctly, a child gains a real opportunity to change, and results will gradually appear through actions, attitude, and character. After several weeks of practicing the new approach, Ethan began to show small but noticeable changes that Mark observed day by day. Every morning, as the first sunlight filtered through his bedroom window, Ethan no longer rushed or slacked off. He would wake up, have breakfast, and prepare his school materials on his own initiative. Before, getting his books ready had always been a battle between father and son. Now, Ethan did it methodically and proudly, his eyes reflecting a quiet sense of achievement. Mark noticed that his son's attitude had shifted. He proactively asked questions, took careful notes, and listened attentively to teachers' instructions. At school, Ethan no longer walked in casually or distractedly, but entered the classroom with straight posture and observant eyes, aware of his surroundings. During lessons, he raised his hand at the right time, sometimes reminding his classmates to focus. Mark felt a gentle, mixed sense of pride and joy witnessing Ethan taking responsibility and actively engaging in learning. One Wednesday, Mark took Ethan to meet his former teacher, Mrs. Wilson, who had been strict with him in the past. Previously, Ethan had been apprehensive around her, often hiding mistakes or making excuses. This time, however, he stepped confidently into the classroom, bowed slightly, and said, "Hello, Mrs. Wilson. I know I wasn't focused before, and today I want to do better." Mrs. Wilson's eyes softened and she smiled. "You've grown a lot. I'm proud of you." In that moment, Ethan felt the joy of being acknowledged for doing the right thing, rather than fear or defensiveness. Mark, standing outside, saw a clear shift in his son's mindset and learning attitude. Back home, Ethan began to enjoy self-directed learning and managing his own study habits. He sat at his desk, reading, doing homework, and even setting weekly goals for himself. Mark observed him taking meticulous notes, analyzing questions, and checking his answers. Tasks that previously required constant prompting from his father. Whenever he encountered difficulties, instead of complaining, Ethan would ask himself, "How can I solve this?" and try different approaches. In class, teachers noticed the change. Ethan was no longer inattentive or skipping assignments. He began to actively participate in group activities, cooperate with classmates, share ideas, and respect others' opinions. Other students took notice of this transformation. Some who had been quiet now approached him for help, and Ethan readily assisted them. Mark realized that respecting teachers had begun to influence how Ethan treated others, gradually shaping a positive character. He thought to himself, when a child learns to respect those who teach him, he also learns to respect the people around him. One evening, Mark took Ethan to the library for a group reading session with other students. Ethan was initially nervous, eyes wide with uncertainty, but as he entered the room, he bowed to the instructor, listened carefully, and confidently shared his perspectives. Mark stood outside, observing the boy's eyes, a clear increase in confidence, showing for the first time that Ethan could stand on his own without constant parental guidance. Over the following weeks, Mark continued to demonstrate respect toward teachers, modeling behavior for Ethan. Every time they met a teacher, he would bow, listen attentively, and converse politely. Ethan watched and mirrored this behavior, forming positive habits, taking responsibility for his own actions, and realizing that proper attitude led to positive outcomes. The transformation was evident not only academically, but also psychologically. Ethan complained less, grew more confident, and developed a strong sense of responsibility. He learned to face mistakes directly when he got an answer wrong. He didn't make excuses or avoid the issue, but asked, "How can I improve next time?" This represented a significant shift in his mindset, proving that attitude change lays the groundwork for behavioral and cognitive growth. One Friday, when Mark reviewed Ethan's test results, he saw a notable improvement in scores. But more importantly, he noticed how Ethan approached problems, carefully analyzing each question and not ignoring small details. Mark realized that this progress stemmed from a positive attitude and respect for teachers, not innate intelligence or luck. Throughout the week, Mark and Ethan discussed study strategies, ways to improve scores, how to participate effectively in group work, and how to proactively ask questions. Ethan shared experiences from interactions with teachers and peers, and the pride he felt when praised. Mark saw joy in his son's eyes, a joy he had never seen before, the joy of learning, self-discipline, and doing things correctly by the weekend. Mark sat at the study desk, watching Ethan organize books and plan his study week. He realized that his son's transformation had exceeded initial expectations. No longer a shy, insecure boy, Ethan had become a student who took responsibility, respected teachers, and actively developed himself. Mark thought to himself, "This transformation proves the power of patience, respect, and parental modeling. When a parent changes and guides properly, the child truly changes." and results appear gradually through behavior, attitude, and character. In that quiet moment, sunlight poured through the window, and Mark felt a gentle, complete sense of happiness, knowing that both father and son were walking the right path, a path leading to academic success and personal growth. As time went on, the patience and bridge-building method Mark had applied to Ethan began to show clear and lasting results. Ethan was no longer the inattentive, dependent boy he used to be. He had become a proactive, confident, and responsible student. Every morning, the first rays of sunlight filtered through Ethan's bedroom window, illuminating posters and neatly arranged bookshelves that he had organized himself. Ethan woke up on time, ate breakfast efficiently, prepared his school materials, and planned his day independently. Gone were the days when Mark had to remind him step by step or push him to study. Now, Ethan scheduled his priorities, focused on challenging subjects, and double-checked his work before leaving the house. A quiet sense of pride and joy shone in his eyes. At school, Ethan's transformation astonished both teachers and classmates. Previously, he would often be distracted, avoid participating, or shy away from teachers' questions. But now he actively engaged in class, raised his hand at the right moment, asked thoughtful questions, and even tackled challenging assignments without hesitation. In group work, he not only completed his part, but also guided, shared knowledge, and assisted his peers, becoming an essential part of the team. Other students quickly noticed the change. Those who had been quiet or distant now approached Ethan for help, and he always responded willingly and positively. His proactive, positive attitude spread to the classroom, benefiting both his own learning and the group's dynamic. One Monday afternoon, his homeroom teacher, Mrs. Linda, called Mark in to discuss Ethan's progress. With a bright smile, she said, "Mark, Ethan has really grown. He now takes responsibility, listens attentively, and shows respect to both teachers and peers. He even helps other students with their work. I'm genuinely proud of his progress." Mark felt a deep sense of fulfillment, realizing that all the patience and the bridge-building approach had truly worked. He understood that when parents change their attitude toward teachers and guide their children properly, it becomes the key to shaping character and improving academic performance. Ethan's grades improved steadily across all subjects. Previously, he had only achieved average or low marks in subjects he didn't like. But now he studied proactively, reviewed regularly, and explored topics more deeply, even in subjects he once found boring or frustrating. His end-of-term results showed that he had achieved strong academic performance, exceeding both his and Mark's expectations. More importantly than grades was the growth in Ethan's attitude and character. He had learned to respect teachers, listen, take responsibility, and face challenges confidently. When encountering difficulties, he no longer feared or avoided them. Instead, he found solutions and learned from mistakes. He sought advice from teachers, joined extracurricular activities, participated in group discussions, and managed his emotions effectively under pressure. One afternoon, Mark observed Ethan doing homework. He watched as Ethan carefully analyzed each question, took meticulous notes, wrote out multiple approaches, and evaluated the pros and cons of each method. Mark realized that Ethan had developed critical thinking skills, something he had never imagined his son capable of before. Ethan's social interactions also improved. He became friendly, cooperative, and attentive, learning to listen, compromise, collaborate. and support his peers when needed. This not only boosted his confidence, but also created a positive learning environment, benefiting everyone around him. One weekend, Mark and Ethan reviewed the week's studies together. Ethan shared, "Dad, I feel happy when I accomplish something on my own, and when teachers recognize my efforts. I think respecting teachers not only helps me learn better, but also makes me feel more confident." Mark nodded, his eyes filled with pride. "That's right, son. I'm very proud of you. This is the result of learning to respect, take responsibility, and be self-disciplined. I can see that you have truly changed." Watching Ethan's bright, confident eyes, Mark felt the full growth of his son, from study habits and character to social skills. No longer the fearful, lazy child, Ethan now set goals, adjusted his behavior, and actively sought learning opportunities in his environment. Sunlight streamed through the window, casting a warm glow on Ethan's organized study desk. Mark took a deep breath, sipped his coffee, and smiled, feeling the complete happiness of a father witnessing his child's maturation, knowing that months of patience, guidance, and respect for teachers had truly transformed his son's life. He thought to himself, "This transformation isn't just about grades, it's about building a solid foundation of character. When a child learns to respect, listen, and take responsibility, he can step into the world confidently, independently, and maturely." In that quiet moment, Mark felt peace, happiness, and hope, no longer burdened by worry or disappointment. Only pride watching his son take confident steps on the path of learning and personal growth. Part 10 Lessons and Reflections. The morning light streamed through the living room window, falling on Ethan's neatly arranged study desk. Open books lay before him, pencils lined up carefully, each line of writing reflecting his focus and dedication. Mark sat nearby, sipping his warm tea, watching his son with a mixture of happiness and pride. In that moment, he realized that Ethan's transformation wasn't just about better academic results, but also about personal growth, character development, and independence, things he once believed were determined solely by money or genetics. Mark recalled the long months of worry and disappointment when Ethan had failed to get into college. Back then, he thought that financial investment and pushing his son to study harder would solve everything. But reality taught him a critical lesson: misguided love can unintentionally undermine a child's independence and self-confidence. Having few children, plenty of money, and high expectations, these alone do not guarantee success. This realization made Mark reflect deeply on his own approach to parenting. He came to understand that raising a child properly requires guidance, patience, and, above all, modeling respect for those who educate them. Through Ethan's journey, Mark saw that respect for teachers forms the foundation for effective learning and character development. By demonstrating respect, accompanying Ethan to visit his former teachers, observing how his son faced challenges, and encouraging self-discipline, Mark helped spark a transformative turning point. Ethan was no longer the hesitant, unsure boy he once was. He became an active learner, attentive, responsible, and capable of independent thought. Mark watched Ethan jot down notes with precision, organizing his thoughts logically and naturally. A smile crossed his face as he thought, "This is the message for all parents. It's not pressure, money, or genetics that determine success, it's attitude, patience, and the right examples set by parents." Every small action Ethan took now demonstrated a clear truth. When children are guided properly and understand the value of respect and effort, they develop autonomy, confidence, and the ability to succeed. That morning, as Ethan planned his schedule for math, physics, and English, Mark didn't have to remind or push him. Everything was unfolding naturally, driven by responsibility and self-motivation. Mark remembered the times he had overprotected his son, the arguments with teachers over minor disciplinary actions, the bursts of frustration born from his disappointment and expectations. At the time, he didn't realize that these behaviors had inadvertently shaken Ethan's trust in his teachers, making learning stressful and difficult. Now, he understood that respect for teachers, correct parental attitudes, and patient guidance were the true keys to nurturing a well-rounded child. He reflected on Ethan's progression, from the initial shyness and reluctance to participate in class, to gradually opening up to his teachers, becoming self-driven in his homework, asking questions proactively, and ultimately excelling in college entrance exams. Each step was inseparable from Mark's deliberate actions, modeling respect, visiting former teachers with Ethan, listening to him, encouraging him, and supporting his learning decisions. Mark realized that education isn't just about imparting knowledge, it's about teaching a child how to live, respect others, and take responsibility. These lessons will accompany Ethan for life, shaping him into an independent, confident, and responsible individual. He understood that true growth cannot be measured by grades alone, but by a child's attitude, problem-solving ability, and self-discipline. He smiled, feeling a profound sense of peace and fulfillment. Those months of worry and frustration had become an essential part of the parenting journey. They taught him how to love his child correctly, guide patiently, and respect those who educate him. Ethan now stood as a living testament to the power of respect, correct attitudes, and proper guidance. Mark wanted to share this message with everyone, especially parents. Love your children the right way. Love is not about overprotection, spoiling, or pressure. It's about patience, proper guidance, and setting an example for children to follow. When children observe their parents demonstrating respect and discipline, they learn how to live, interact, and adopt positive attitudes toward learning. Respect for teachers is the foundation of education. When children learn to respect their educators, they engage actively in learning, listen attentively, absorb knowledge, and develop sustainable self-learning skills. Parents must model respect, regardless of a teacher's age or status, so children internalize and practice this value. Character and attitude matter more than grades. Scores may fluctuate, but qualities like responsibility, initiative, and confidence are lifelong assets. With the right attitude, children can overcome obstacles, learn independently, respect others, and develop essential life skills. Learning is a long journey, not just a final goal. The objective of education is not only achievement, scholarships, or high grades, it's growth, confidence, independence, and proper attitudes. When parents guide patiently, children discover the value of learning and cultivate skills that allow them to face life with confidence and a strong foundation. Mark gazed out the window at sunlight filtering through lush green trees, the birds singing cheerfully, and the quiet neighborhood seemingly brimming with life and hope. He realized that education is not merely about academics, it's about teaching children how to live, how to respect, and how to take responsibility. These lessons will accompany Ethan for life, helping him become independent, confident, and accountable to himself and the community. He smiled, exhaling a deep, contented breath, knowing that the past months of worry and frustration had become a vital part of the journey, teaching him to love correctly, guide patiently, and respect those who educate his child. Ethan, with bright, shining eyes, continued his learning and personal growth, living proof of the power of respect, the right attitude and proper guidance, and the message Mark wishes to spread to everyone. Especially parents, be a shining example for your children. Respect those who teach them and guide them with patience and the right kind of love. In doing so, your children will stand tall on their own, move forward with confidence, and grow beyond measure. It is not pressure, expectations, or money that shape their future, but the attitude and example set by their parents. Sunlight continued to stream through the window, and the lingering smoke of Mark's old habit had long since vanished, replaced by hope, happiness, and complete peace of mind. Ethan, eyes gleaming with determination, carried on with his studies and growth, living testament to the power of respect, correct attitudes, and proper guidance, a reminder that the true value of education lies in character, attitude, and independence, not merely grades or achievements.